Okay, thank you for coming. Well, I suppose you know me. I'm Monique from IC Library, and want to introduce you my colleague from ISUM Library. She's the head of the Department of Library Documentation and Information System. And she has worked a lot on open access, and we had the occasion in July to work together on the topic, and the research division kindly invited her to present this talk today. So welcome, Guta.
Thank you very much, Monique. Y hola y buenos días a todos y todas. Y muchísimas gracias por la invitación. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today at ISC. And as you know, this will be a joint talk between Monique and myself. And we think it's a very timely talk that we want to present to you today. It's about open access in astronomy, as you know. How did it happen? What is the status? And where are we going? Okay, so just to get into the topic, we thought we start with a little view at the general work culture in astronomy. Because if we look at it, you know, of course, observatories are geographically very wide apart. But still, despite this geographical distance, or maybe because of it actually, there's a great community, both among researchers and also librarians, has always been. We are pretty closely connected, more than other subject areas. And there's a large tradition also of sharing, exchanging, be it papers, data, software, best practices, ideas, projects, you name it. And this can also be seen in the wide-ranging read access that we have to our astronomy literature. Because if you think about it, astronomers, together with high-energy physicists, I want to say, are among those that apply green open access, let's say, by depositing their manuscripts on servers, archive, AstroPH, the most. Also, our core journals, and we will see what we call core journals, of course, later, but you know it, they were digitized by the publishers together with the ADS platform. And now they are freely available back to volume 1. This is a specialty, so other subject areas do not enjoy having free and full access to their entire archives. That's something very special. Also, let's say pre-22, when things were changing, publishers already traditionally provided access to some selected latest articles free of charge to everybody. And then, of course, after only 1 year, at least A&A and MNRS, they made their full content available without any subscription. This is a very special situation. And this is also reflected in our core journals. Now, of course, when we talk about the core journals, you know which 4 journals I'm talking about. It's typically A&A, the American ones, APJ, and MNRS from the UK. And in these 4 essential journals, let's say, more than 35% of the entire refereed astronomy literature is published. That's a very high percentage. Monique and I, we were comparing, like, where do our scientists publish, and we found that it's pretty much the same for us. Over 80% of our first author papers are published in these 4 journals, and over 60% are published in A&A and MNRS alone. So it's very concentrated on our core journals, really. And even more, even better, I want to say, these are not solely in the hands of commercial publishers, because they are governed by learned societies. Again, this is very special. And then our learned societies, they publish them in cooperation together with commercial publishers. So if we look at the time, again, before 2022, APJ, you know, they have this agreement with IOP Publishing. And basically their income was subscriptions. And then if you wanted to publish with them, you had to pay a moderate page charge. For A&A, the governing board is the board of directors, so that means the community of member countries of A&A, the community of researchers. They publish it currently together with EDP Sciences. And again, they used to have subscriptions, but then there were no page charges whatsoever for authors from the member countries. And MNRS, of course, published together with Oxford. They were only based on subscriptions. There were no publishing charges whatsoever. In conclusion, that means that the community of researchers really strongly influences our core journals. They have a large say in how we publish the content that is being made available. And also, especially in Europe, they are very much used to publishing, let's say, hassle-free, with really minimal researcher burden. However, things were happening also outside of astronomy, and this actually goes back decades already. So many people, mostly researchers, also librarians, they came to the conclusion that our publishing system as is broken. And this is because it is really mostly dominated by large, for-profit, commercial publishers. And this is not going to say that publishing doesn't cost anything. Of course it costs. But maybe it doesn't have to cost so much that the publishing companies need to go to the stock market. So there were many people over a long time, and I'm talking here really decades ago, unhappy about the situation. And in response, something came about that is called the open access movement. So really this has been around since the 90s, and of course it became much more pronounced when the internet became available, because then we had options for alternative models. And the motivation to bring about this open access publishing is twofold. One is that many people thought, well, publicly funded research should be available to the general public in order to, have better knowledge exchange, make knowledge available to everybody. And the second is that this is something coming mostly from the librarians community, that we really could not cope with the ever-rising subscription prices anymore. So we needed to put a stop, a cap on journal subscriptions, and also make the costs that we are paying to the publishers more transparent. These were the two main motivations. Then for the longest time, not so much was actually happening. It was a little bit of lobbying, and yeah, there were some people dedicated to that, but the real push happened in 2018. You may remember when the ERC put out their so-called Plan S, and that all of a sudden was coming from the funders' side, and they made it obligatory. They made open access publishing obligatory. Not immediately. Initially, they had a grace period of 3 years, then they extended it to 4 years, okay. But it was obligatory, and this S in the Plan S, there are various interpretations what it could mean. The people behind, they said, well, it stands for solution. Then there were others that said, no, it stands for shock. And actually, the person who brought it on, his name was Robert Jan Smits. So my interpretation is the S is coming from his name, actually, but that's a side note. So if we look at what open access publishing really means, what is the definition? It means the free, immediate online availability of research articles, along with the rights to use these articles fully in the digital environment. Now, if you think about it as astronomers, you will say, well, free, immediate online availability, I have that on archive. We have that anyway. What's the big fuzz? The big fuzz is coming from the rights to use. And that is what usually happens when you publish. You sign away your rights. You sign them away to the publishers. In the open access publishing, you don't, because the usage rights reside with you as the researchers, as the creators of the artifact. And this is usually expressed in what we call open licenses. And the best known is the Creative Commons CC BY license, which is one of the most versatile, let's say, and far-reaching and simple to implement. Now, immediately after this happened, we saw some initial effects actually very fast, and they were not exactly the ones that were intended. They were unintended side effects. So number one, publishers, of course, they're not sleeping, right? They're saying, okay, the subscriptions very soon will not be there anymore. What on earth do we do to maintain our income? And they said, so the readers are not going to pay us anymore. Who could pay us? Oh, the authors. And here we went from the reader's pay model to the author's pay model. I will tell you more about that in a second. Another effect was that many journals all of a sudden came about, they hadn't been there before, and they jumped on the same model and said, folks, just send us your manuscripts. We will publish them if you pay, of course. You may very well remember, and probably it still happens to you, that you get these spam messages, you know, we all find them in our mailboxes. Please come and publish with us. And that led to the idea of many people that open access is something bad because it lacks quality control. And that's not true. It is really coming from this ruining of the reputation from this era. But if you think about it, open access has many benefits. So first of all, let me see where I can move my mouse. You see up here, if your article is available worldwide, of course, there's much more exposure for your article, so higher visibility. You make it available to the entire world, rich, poor, you know, black, white, everybody. It might also, as you see here, lead to higher citations. This can happen. There's some studies that prove that. Taxpayers, of course, have direct access. If you think of medicine, practitioners have immediate access to it. And in general, also, of course, as we said before, funders might now be requiring it. So you are playing by the rules also of the funders. One very striking example, of course, where open access really had a good benefit is the recent pandemic. Well, you know, we are still kind of in it. For COVID-19, when COVID-19 broke out, publishers agreed immediately to make all articles that had to do with virology and, you know, anything that could help available open access. And this is one of the reasons why the vaccines became available so fast. And the UNESCO, actually a big promoter of open access, open science, they made a study and they said 70% of all scientific literature worldwide is behind closed doors. You cannot access it unless you have a subscription. In turn, 85% of the COVID-19 related publications are available. That's like opposite ends. And it had a very good effect, very important for humankind. Now, if we look at what is the status of open access in astronomy, and you will all know it, here we are again with the 4 core journals, A&A, FJ, AJ, and monthly notices, and they all have or are in the process of moving to open access. For the American and journals and for A&A, this has happened already as of 2022, and monthly notices is going to move to open access as of next year. However, they are choosing different models, and this is what I would like to explain to you. So FJ and AJ, they have decided in favor of what we call APC-based or gold open access. APC stands for article processing charges, and it's a fee similar to the page charges to be paid by the authors. Now the APC prices for AJ, they depend on the journal and the length of the article. They are somewhere between, let's say, 1,100 and 4,500 euros. I converted this. They do have a waiver policy in place, which now they like to call publication support, because waiver does not sound very well to them. So it is in place. And for the community of authors that publish with AJ, FJ, we see increased costs still in comparison with the page charges. For MNRES, they will be choosing basically the same system, slightly different price, so both for the letters and the main journal, we see like 2,500 more or less, with some discount for RAS members. Okay, they also have a waiver policy. You can knock on their doors and say, please, can you waive your costs for me? Okay, fine. Here, the community has not been used before to any charges because MNRES was just financed through subscription. So this is a newly introduced cost for authors, and we are expecting quite some changes there. From the cost perspective, of course, now the total annual costs, especially in the beginning, they're very difficult to calculate. One thing is clear, though, the APCs, if we look at the high number of astronomers that are publishing in these journals in our institutes, they will never be compensated by the comparable low amounts of subscription money that we are now saving, because we don't have to pay them anymore. And again, just to say, just last year, 30% basically of the IAC and ESO authored papers were published in MNRS. So what can we now expect? Vastly increased costs? Well, you know, our budgets are not going to vastly increase. So our view is here that if you introduce a model like these APCs, what you're doing is you change the access barrier, you shift it from initially reading to now publishing. So in principle, you know, you don't achieve anything. This authors pay model is therefore not equitable. Not, you know, it does favor the rich, it does favor the global north. It's not right. And waivers, as we mentioned before, they are well intended, but still, as a researcher, you have to go knock on their doors and say, please, please. It's not right. It's patronizing. It shouldn't be like that. It should be easier for everybody. For authors who can pay, it is still disruptive, because now you have to handle some kind of invoices and some new processes. And also, it requires a new infrastructure in our institution. So at the very minimum, if we have a budget, a global, let's call it publications budget maybe, we need to decide, where is it now located? Will it be in the administration? Will it be in the library? How do we do it? And then there's even ethical questions, I want to call them, because the budget will be limited, right? How do we spend it? Do we have guidelines how to spend it? Should, let's say, professors publish first and the students, like, if there's money? Should we favor women and the guys have to wait? Or do we do it by first come, first serve? And then in July or August, you know, it's all gone. We have nothing. So these are questions that need to be answered before we embark on such a model. A&A, Astronomy and Astrophysics, they have chosen a different model. They have chosen something that we call a collaborative or diamond open access model, where really librarians, publishers, and the research community work together in order to make it happen. The model that they have used and slightly modified is called Subscribe to Open. And the idea here is that the libraries, with their established subscriptions, they continue. And in this way, we achieve global read access. The A&A member countries, who also continue to give their contributions to the journal, they cover the editorial costs for member state or member country authors. So you, since Spain is a member country of A&A, as authors don't have to pay any page charges. Authors from third countries, let's say, that are not member states, they do have to pay minimal page charges though. But in practice, it means that there is no change for anybody. The processes, the procedures are exactly the same like before. From a costs point of view, of course, it is also, it's the same as before, with maybe, hopefully, possibly a little bit of saving, because the publisher tries to make it attractive. So they say, if you renew early with us, we give you a little discount, okay? And from our point of view as librarians, we think this system might not be perfect, okay, but it is certainly a move in the right direction. It is collaborative, it's cost neutral, and it is mostly equitable, we can say. It's also transparent and predictable, because we know pretty much what to expect. And it uses the existing infrastructure, in particular with budget handling, so nobody needs to reinvent the wheel. And because the workflow is unchanged, but we still achieve global open access, we assume that this model finds a high acceptance among the researcher community. There are also some other models around, and this is a little bit technical, so please bear with me. I just would like to explain them to you so that you have an idea. The first one is what we call read and publish, or publish and read, or maybe you have heard the name transformative agreements. These are really high-level agreements between research organizations, sometimes entire countries, and the publishers. And there's a very complex cost calculation underlying, where basically the publisher goes ahead and says, okay, this is the amount that you have paid so far for the subscriptions. Now we also calculate how many articles do we expect from your research to be published with us. We put a price tag, an APC if you wish, on these articles. Then, you know, we mix it all, and out comes a number that the publisher gives to the country, to the institution. This then typically provides access to the entire publisher's portfolio and some open access publishing. But attention, often here the number of articles is capped, it's limited. So when you reach that limit, again, you have to pay individual APCs for the remaining articles, and they can be quite hefty. So in the case of Nature, for instance, you know, it can be thousands of euros for one article process and charge. So these participating institutions, when they actually do the builds, they find themselves confronted with higher costs than before. And in addition, they also still have this dependency that we know from the so-called big deals that we wanted to avoid, hopefully. And it's no wonder that examples of this model are Nature, for instance, and also Elsevier. They love these things. There's another model which we call overlay journals. Maybe you have heard that. And the idea here is that it's still some kind of gold, so APC-based open access model. However, the APCs are really low, and sometimes actually they are not even existing. What is happening here is that an existing ePrint infrastructure, so for instance, Archive, is used as the platform, and then the initiators of the overlay journal, they put on top of that a refereeing structure. These initiatives are typically run by volunteers, so these are researchers behind the scenes that are running this, and it's a lot of volunteer effort. The money that is needed in such a system typically is coming from grants, from foundations, altruistic endeavors, and that brings a certain instability. So as you can see in this model, these overlay journals, publishers and their expertise is out. This is typically a journal model that runs without publishers. In astronomy, we do have an example, the Open Journal of Astrophysics. I gave you the URL here. If you look at the number of articles that are being published there, it's not super high. So these models are not yet catching on. Nobody really knows it, but it might be something to monitor. The last thing that I wanted to introduce to you is the so-called subscription plus rights retention strategy. Now, what is happening here is that you publish as an author your article as before in a closed subscription-based publication, for instance, Science. Now, in addition, it may happen that you have gotten a grant from a funder that requires that you put your manuscript out with an open license, with a CC BY license. So what is happening here is that the peer-reviewed, fully refereed version of your manuscript, which we often call author-accepted manuscript, AAM, with the CC BY license, you put it on a repository archive, let's say, including the license. So de facto, this results in two parallel versions of the same article. But some journals, Science for instance, they are okay with that. If we are looking at the overall changes that the system brings, it is clear that we are changing here the fairness, let's say, so fair, always for findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, the fairness of the manuscripts. We are not changing any journals here. Okay, so if we really, really want to move towards open access, I think it's clear that there is a certain culture change going on. I also like to call it a paradigm shift. And when Monique and I talk about this, we often ask ourselves, well, we are not so sure where our astronomy community stands. Do they actually full-heartedly embrace the idea of open access, or do they think, well, you know, it was actually pretty nice the way it was before. I don't see the benefits in all this effort, you know. I lived happily before with my archive server. So here we want to bring to you this African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, walk alone. However, if you want to go far, go together. And I think this is exactly what is happening in astronomy. So far we went fast. We were way ahead of other subject areas. Many others were way behind us. However, then it happened that they were catching up, and in some regard, they're actually now bypassing astronomy. So we think that astronomy is really an integral part of science, and general science practices and good science publishing standards should be applied also to astronomy. And we do believe that we can do that. Researchers and librarians together, and funders and organizations, publishers, in order to, in the end, achieve a better publishing landscape. Now, what is the strategy for culture change? Maybe you've seen this pyramid. It has been developed, I think, by Brian Nosek. It's often used. It is basically a bottom-up pyramid where you see the first thing is you have to have an infrastructure. So you need to make it possible for the community. The second is provide user interfaces, give a good user experience, make it easy for the community. Third step, the community has to buy in. So make it normative, make it normal, make it expected. Number 4 is you want to put out incentives. This is very important. People ask, what's in it for me? Why should I? So make it rewarding. And the final thing at the tip, that's then policies. Make it required. So if we just look one moment at how we are doing in astronomy here, again, only with regard to our core journals, we see that, yeah, the possibility to publish open access, yes, open access is now a reality for our core journals. Check. With regard to make it easy, well, I mean, yeah, it's easy if you have the means to publish, like we said, AJ, FJ, MNRAS. If you have the money, okay. Or if there are no publishing charges like with A&A. But fully achieved, I would say, no, it's not yet. Make it normative, I would say, well, the manuscript posting on archive, that is in astronomy pretty much normative. Everybody does it so that your colleagues see your articles. This is expected almost. The full open access, not so much. So again, I think halfway. Make it rewarding, this is the big question mark. So far, our evaluation systems are still very much geared towards this infamous journal impact factor, which is being misused. So we are just counting the articles, we are just counting the citations to the articles. There are initiatives to make this better and bring the open science, open access quality more forward. For instance, Goara and Dora, I don't want to go into detail here, but these are efforts to modify our evaluation system. And then finally, make it required. So are there any policies in place that actually oblige astronomers to do things open access? And there we have to say, well, whether or not it's in place, it really depends on which fund you're looking at. And this is where Monique will take over.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Switch the next slide. Okay. So in open access publishing in Spain, what is the situation? Well, because it's mandatory to publish in open access since 2011, the Ley de la Ciencia, the law of science. That was revised in 2022, and it's the same thing. Authors have to deposit a copy of the final version accepted for publication and the associated data in a repository. Open access, of course. And authors have to retain usage rights, CC BY, for example. In some Spanish grants, it's possible to get reimbursement of publication fees to publish in open access. And now at the European level, there are also regulations about open access publishing. It's mandatory, and I will explain the difference between Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, because we have advanced a bit more in open science in Horizon Europe. In Horizon 2020, you had to deposit a copy of the published version or the first peer review, the final peer review manuscript in a trusted repository for scientific publication. They didn't mention anything about licenses. In Horizon Europe, you have to do the same with the manuscript and or the published version, but you also have to deposit the associated data in a trusted repository. There are also further open science requirements in Horizon Europe, especially related with data. You probably know if you have applied for a grant. And it's mandatory to use open license in CC BY. In Horizon 2020, you could get reimbursement of publication fees to publish in open access, but in Horizon Europe now, you can get back the money only if the journal in which you publish is full open access. It's not reimbursable in the case of hybrid journal. A hybrid journal is a journal that requires a subscription to access the content, but that allow others to publish, to pay to publish open access. So you have articles behind the wall, you have to pay the subscription, and at the same time you have some articles open access. So the publisher receives two amounts, one for the subscription and one for the open access fees. So it doesn't seem to be very fair. And now we will see the role of librarians, yes. What do we library have to do with open access publishing? Well, we are involved because we have to monitor and deal with new models to subscribe to a journal, to acquire books. We assess our community needs regarding open access publishing. We inform researchers about ongoing changes. We also provide help when they submit an article and the publisher says, do you want to publish it open access? And they ask, well, what should I do, and so and so. We also collect metrics about open access status of publication to report to funding agency. And well, we have to be aware of changes in national and European regulations on open access publishing, and to inform our community, of course. And we continue to observe development and trends because it's changing very fast, especially in our field. In 2-3 years, the landscape is very different. And well, this is only a picture of what we do. We are in the middle, and we have to facilitate the life of researchers regarding open access. We are a mediator with publishers. We advocate for Plan S and open access publishing, but not at any cost. We use some tools and concepts, and we have something that is very strong in astronomy, is a community of librarians in astronomy. We are very, we are used to collaborate, like you who have to deal with your colleagues in any part of the world. We are in contact with every astronomy librarian in the world. So we collaborate a lot. And now Uta will tell you.
Yeah, just to conclude the final part, because we said where are we coming from, where are we now, and where are we going. So just to dare a little open access outlook, so to say, well, first what we can say is that we can't say much, in the sense that there is very likely not any one-fits-all solution on the horizon. So probably there will be a large mix of models for the foreseeable future. However, authors, of course, are kind of expected. They should know the pros and cons of the individual models, like we tried to point out in these presentations. And of course, librarians are always here to help you go through this, what may seem as a mess, and a changing mess at a fast pace also. What we always want to emphasize is that really one of the main drivers of this whole open access movement was to reduce, in the ideal case, or at the very least, stabilize costs. Keep costs stable was one of the main drivers of the open access movement. And the whole move towards OA has to be cost neutral. There's already so much money in the system, nobody can afford to pour more and cope with even higher demands from publishers. We also want to emphasize again that we think we must avoid this dependency on the high-priced commercial for-profit publishers like we have seen in the past in the big deals. So then to just summarize, we think that open access is really a paradigm shift. We are now at a point where the publishing landscape is changing, and we really want to encourage everybody, we must get it right. We can influence it, and we should, for the better. As we have seen, there are already too many unintended side effects, like this continued injustice and the favoring of the global north, the dependency on the for-profit commercial publishers. Better open access models are around. They can be imagined. You know, we don't have to prematurely accept these APC-based open access models. However, these other models, they still need more attention and more application. And you, as authors, have to be aware, and we really want to encourage you, you make strategic decisions when you publish, where you publish. So our mantra in that regard is, let's strive together as a community for collaborative, equitable, transparent, and sustainable open access so that we can create a better publishing model. Thank you, and we're happy to answer your questions.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a comment on the question. The comment maybe is about what is the role of the archive from the point of view of the librarians. In some sense, maybe the engagement, I mean, I'm not a little bit open access, maybe Monique and so on. But somehow maybe the engagement is a little bit reduced by the fact that we have the archive, right? So our knowledge is always available and always accessible. And in some sense for us, you know, at the basic level is some sort of open access that we have had that in the 90s. So still we publish papers because we need a quality control. And therefore, of course, we get an order, we are asked to pay APCs and these kind of things. And all this because we didn't see before. Right? So it's just to know more or less what is the weakness of archive from the point of view of open access, and to pay some other fully run archive. That's one common question. And the question is about the scope 3. I mean, this model that is being pushed in high energy physics, and how do you think it's sustainable? Can be exported to other fields? Thanks.
Yes, so with regard to archive, I mean, this is of course a super useful infrastructure. I don't think it will go away, and it should not go away. But the big difference, like we try to point out, is that if you put your content there without an open license, it's free to read. So it's not even available, let's say, for text mining. So for instance, we both have databases where we, text mine the literature in order to find papers that use data from our respective telescopes, and then we put them in a database and so on and so forth. Once upon a time, at ESO, we tried to scrape the archive, big scale, text mine articles deposited there in order to have early access to the articles. They nearly shut us down. They don't have the right, we don't have the reuse rights. And that is, like I tried to point out, the real difference with the license, yes. Because if you publish in a traditional journal, let's say, what you can and cannot do, even you as an author, is governed by the publisher, because you sign away the rights to the publisher. So even, let's say, you want to use your own article to publish in a book, or Wikipedia asks, can I use your figure? It's so fantastic, we want to make it available to the general community. You have to ask the journal, could you please, allow me to reuse my own article, my own figure? Not so with open licenses. Then it's totally in your hands. Everybody can reuse, including you. That's the big difference. And in that, as such, archive, of course, can have a super large value, like we are seeing now. This Open Journal of Astrophysics, it's already using archive as the backbone, let's say, as the structure. Then they are putting on top this refereeing structure with volunteers who referee the articles, and out comes at the end a fully refereed article. Whether this is the only way of publishing, I don't think. Like we tried to say, I think there will be a large mix, but it's one option.
Yes. About scope 3, well, we are, ISA is a contributor of, a contributor of scope 3. We have to pay to CERN, and we have to renew some journals too. It's a mix of our contribution is 2 payments. Well, we did it because we enter in scope not 3, not because we asked for, but because we had, when we contact us, IC was the first publisher in Spain of article of the scope initiative. So I think if CERN continue to support that, because they pay much more than us, we continue. But the thing is that we pay directly to publisher. Well, it's fair because we pay to the publisher only for the articles that are behind the subscription. And for open access articles, publishers receive the money from what we pay to CERN. Okay? So in hybrid journals, publishers, you pay the subscription and you also pay the fees too.
I don't know what the scope 3 is, but in high energy physics, there is an agreement, CERN and other institutions pay the journal to cover for VPCs of any journal that is published or posted on the archive in the categories of high energy physics. So for example, I will have to pay any cost if I publish, if I post my article in the 58, whatever. So my question is whether ESO or any other people could play the role that CERN is playing in high energy physics. For astronomy, for all these other journals, right?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're not super surprised. I've been asked the same thing like 10 years ago by the person who crafted Scope back then in CERN, and I said clearly, thank you, but thanks, but thanks, no, no thanks, because, and I think this is actually the shortcoming of Scope. The idea is good, but it has a huge machinery, it has a huge administration in the background. There were years of lobbying that CERN had to do before they could even convert the first journal. And now they have converted four journals. It's not, plus individual articles, but 4 have been converted totally. That's not super much. So it's a lot of effort to get everybody online, you know, in the same spirit. Then you have to have the administration to calculate the costs and distribute the costs, to collect the fees. It's a huge machinery. And I mean, in high energy physics, this is a large community. I think it might work. CERN, chapeau, they are doing that really with regard to open science, open access. They do so much. I can only admire them. But I think for astronomy, other models, more, you know, smaller, more versatile, more agile models could work better.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I expect, you know, a lot of papers coming to A&A next year, of course, because of this. But do you know if there is a plan to add a section in A&A about supplemental data or something like that? Like, you know, like they did in the past, but they remove it because right now, you know, for data papers or things like that, we only have FJ supplement series.
Yeah, it's a very timely question. I think many researchers are looking for that. As of now, I do not know whether they are planning something like that. But then again, I'm not so involved with the journal, so what they are cooking behind the scenes, I don't know. But in my view, it would be very important that the board of directors understand that there is this need. So if you, as researchers who have this need, would reach out to them, or maybe even to your national representative on the board, because every member country has representatives there, I think that would be good, so that they hear from the community there is a need. You're not alone with that request. You know, I've heard that many times before, and maybe this makes them consider. So I would say that's the right route to go to enable change.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question because many of the things that you have been mentioning, they are based on the unpaid labor of referees and in particular there is like private journals that are making money of them. How do you see the role of referees in the long term in this scheme? Because I guess, I don't know, it's complicated and I can see how you can publish one paper and then being asked to referee 100 of the opposite situations. So how do you see that fitting in this whole scheme?
Well, in my view, I mean, the referees are playing the core role next to the authors, right? And this is why the whole system, why I called it broken, because there are some commercial publishers that use your work first because you write the articles and then you referee. And then there's the third part, the libraries in the old model that, you know, pay again, this time with real money. You are paying with your time and knowledge, but we are then paying also with the subscription fee. So this is why I called the system broken. Of course, you have superpowers, right, as authors. And I know that at ESO, you know, there are some ideas already, in particular with very recent changes that we have seen or changes that are coming up next year. Don't want to mention more. That, you know, there could be a certain election with astronomers not engaging so much anymore. This is always an option that you have. This is why we said you make strategic choices in your choice where you want to publish, where you want to referee. Is this what you were, what your question was, or did you go towards open refereeing?
Yeah, but yeah, in the open, because I guess there is a lot of this money that we pay now for fees that it's not going to the private journals. Could it be used to pay the referees? I mean, it's I know the European community is doing for the whole refereeing process, and I think it puts value on the refereeing process. And I don't know if journals, it's something that they are thinking to use the money from the fees to encourage like a more fair refereeing process.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the money that is there in the system, it could be dedicated in another way. This could be, for instance, an overlay journal where you say, you know, we have some volunteering scientists who run the whole thing, we have some volunteering scientists who are doing the refereeing, and so on and so forth. To me, it's a good idea, but it also means a little bit to reinvent the wheel, because we've been there until, you know, we reached a point that the volunteers said we can't cope anymore, and then the publishers came into the picture. So I think it's a balance. Personally, I do not necessarily see the publishers and everything they are doing with the, you know, mastering behind the scenes. Also things like maybe the refereeing process, distributing articles, manuscripts, etc. I don't see them out of the picture. I think they play a vital role in this whole universe, let's say, of publishing. I just don't want them to get paid so unduly high amounts that they can go to the stock market. This, I think, is not right.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very clear. Clarified very much many things we had in our brains that were not quite clear. For authors and researchers, impact factors have been quite important for a while. And you just mentioned in passing that things may be changing in the future with the DORA protocol and so on. So what's ahead for us in terms of impact factors, and how will publications be valued in the future?
I know that in Spain, they're already working, ANECA is working on that. They want to change the system of assessment, evaluation of research work, researcher work. So they're working on it. They are working on it, and as far as I know, they are thinking about a more qualitative method of evaluation and not impact factor of journals. As a librarian, I use impact factor because I need to report, especially for several CHOA program, and I really don't like. I think it's because you have published in Nature, really you are a good scientist, but probably you are. But maybe another scientist who has not published in Nature is as good as you, but he has been able to publish in maybe another journal because of many things. So I think it's good that they are already working on that. And at the European level also, they are working on changing the method of evaluation of researcher work. So, but it's not for tomorrow. I think it will take some time.
Just to add to that, because I hate the impact factor so much, I think it's important to remember that for years and years, it has been misused. The impact factor was crafted to measure the importance of journals. This is how Eugene Garfield, who was behind this idea, meant it. And in order to understand the value, the overall impact of a journal, it's fine. But we are using it to measure the individual value, scientific value of researchers or of individual articles, and that is wrong. The journal impact factor, as the name says, is a journal impact factor and not an article impact factor. It has nothing to do with the individual quality or impact or visibility or distribution and acceptance of the individual article. In order to measure that, we need article level measures. So the impact factor, journal impact factor, always was only a proxy and very badly used. Unfortunately, of course, there are large companies behind who promote it to you, and then, not to you, but to their customers, to universities, large scale, and they make a ton of money out of it, making us believe that in this way we get nice metrics. We do not. And it's really, really time to change that. So we are both very happy that now these initiatives like Quara and DORA come about, and they go, like you said, to qualitative measurements rather than quantitative.
Thanks for the talk. And I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that if you're using Horizon 2020 funds, you need to publish in open access. So how this thing, is it enforced? Is there someone who checks, some checks in place for this?
I didn't hear very well the question. You mean in Horizon Europe?
Yes.
In Horizon Europe, if you have a grant, you can use funds to pay open access publishing, but only if it's an a full open access journal. Okay, and basically that you can get it if the journal is fully open access.
Ah, okay. So
that means and that means
that's the system. Right.
You retain the use right and so on. They did it because they don't want to favor hybrid journals. It's not fair because if a hybrid journal has published many open access articles based on this, they receive a lot of money. But librarians still pay the same amount for subscription. They never decrease the amount of the subscription. It can be raised, it can be maintained, but I think I have never seen a subscription price decrease in 30 years. So.
So no more questions. So if not, let's thank the speakers again. Thank you. So 2 more